Hi guys, my name is Tamara and I am the founder of drawfence.com, which is an online fence and gate drawing tool that doesn't use CAD but creates near CAD quality drawings and written specifications for various fence types. Our tool is marketed mainly to fence companies at the moment, but we are expanding it a lot in terms of the different specifications and options and details and things like that that are included with drawings. So it is going to become a specifying tool that would be useful to people early on in the design process who are struggling to get drawings from fence companies who want to generate some drawings to submit to fence companies to get pricing for a feasibility study or early in the design process and so on. But today I want to talk about one thing in particular, and that is how to specify a chain link fence. Because everybody looks at chain link fences and we see them everywhere, but and everyone thinks, oh, it's just a fence. But the truth is, it's a lot more complicated than it seems. There's a lot that goes into chain link fences that people need to consider when they're doing this kind of specification. And a lot of that is built into the draw fence system, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But the first thing you want to do if you're going to specify a chain link fence is you want to decide what kind of fence you're going to do. So we've got a commercial chain link with bottom wire in concrete, bottom wire base plated, bottom wire with line posts pounded and terminals in concrete, bottom wire with all posts pounded, and then bottom rail for those same options. Then we've also got the same options with slats, so privacy slats, and then we've got an option for buried mesh because that is a added security option that some people need to do, particularly if they have animal problems or if there's a higher security site that they're putting chain link fence around. We do also have the same thing for barbed wire fences. So we've got a lot of different drawing generators. And then each of those is also divided into different types of fence. So most will have with a bottom wire or bottom rail and bracing in concrete, and then with just a bottom wire or bottom rail, and then with bracing and truss rods. Our fences with bottom rails also typically have an option for mid rails, so you can have top, bottom, and mid rail. So that would be the first thing, is you need to decide what kind of fence are you going to specify. Once you've done that part, there's some basic things that you want to do when you're specifying a chain link fence. So I'm going to go into one of our drawing generators right now, and this is a form-based input, so it's really easy to set up the title blocks and stuff like that. You can just enter the information. I've used this before, so our system does also cache the last information that you've put into your uh, drawing generator. So if you're doing the same thing for the same company, like if you're using the same company, the same username and so on, you just change the project name, client name, drawing number, and so on, and then you'd be ready to go. So now we're going to get to the specification part of things because this is where it gets a little more complicated. So our drawing generators are all set up with the available specification options for that particular type of fence. So this actually makes it a lot easier for people to specify fences, even if they don't really know that much about specifying fences. So even if you're not involved directly in the fence industry, if you're a general contractor or an architect or a landscape architect or something like that, you can use our tools to specify those kinds of fences, and it'll have all the options that are available for that, so you don't have to go and hunt for that information anyway. So, the first thing you're going to want to do when you're specifying a fence is decide what the height of the fence is. And that is usually the height from the finished grade to the top of the fence. Some of our fences, like the barbed wire ones, will have a height plus barbed wire, so that usually adds a foot to the height, around about a foot. But that's the first thing that you're going to want to check. There is usually, probably your fence won't be exactly 6 foot, because usually, unless you're doing buried mesh, there's going to be a 2-inch ground clearance at the bottom. Sometimes there could be a little bit more if you want to be able to mow along the fence line. Sometimes it could be a little bit less if you want it to be more secure, but usually there's a 2-inch gap at the bottom of the fence. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select a height. Then the next thing you want to decide is this a commercial fence or is this an industrial fence? And this is going to affect a lot of the things and the way the fence is going to be constructed. So usually, um, people who are using our tools will know whether they want a commercial fence or an industrial fence, and that doesn't really change the options that are available on our drawing generators, but it does sort of lean towards the heavier duty specifications and all those kinds of things. So I'm going to go with regular commercial. And then the next thing you're going to want to choose when you're specifying a chain link fence is what the color of the fence is going to be. So we've actually got our colors split into two. So we've got fence color and we've got um, chain link finish. Because sometimes people will choose to have a galvanized fence structure, but then they choose PVC coated mesh on the galvanized fence structure. So that is an option. You can do a galvanized structure with a PVC coated mesh. It does look better that way than a typical galvanized fence, but obviously it's not as nice as a black powder coated structure and black coated mesh or whatever you're going to do. So you would select or decide what finish your fence is going to be. The next thing you want to do is you want to select the type of terminal posts that you want to use. And on our system, we've got everything organized so that the lightest options are at the top. So that goes for OD or outside diameter, as well as gauge or wall thickness for the pipe. So here, for instance, we've got 2 3/8 OD 13 gauge, and then we've got SS15, SS20, SS40, SKED 40, and so on. And as you go up these, down the list over here, that would become heavier duty and thicker wall and stronger pipe and so on. So you want to always consider both the outside diameter and the gauge or weight of the pipe that you're going to be using. Now, usually a chain link fence will have a terminal post that is heavier duty than the line post. So you could choose to have different wall thickness for those if you want to save a little bit of money. And the reason for that is that the terminal post is the post that's going to be taking all the tension of the fence. So you're going to have your tension bars and your tension bands and everything attached to that post, and you're going to stretch the mesh off that post. So that post has to be sturdier and stronger so that it can take the tension of that mesh. That's also why typically the terminal post concrete footings will be bigger. They may have bigger base plates if you're doing a base plated fence and so on. That's just so that that post can be really well anchored so that it can take the strain or the tension that that wire is going to be putting on the fence. Obviously, the wire will put tension just because of the weight of the wire on posts and top rails and so on, but most of the actual tension from pulling the wire is going to be on the terminal post. So you would select a terminal post that is going to be slightly bigger than the line post and heavy duty enough to carry the weight. And as you can see over here, the smaller the OD or outside diameter of these pipe options are, the more wall thickness options there are. And that's that is just an industry thing. Usually, if you're doing a light duty fence, you would select either 2 3 or 2 7. But if you're doing a heavier duty, sort of more towards the industrial side, you would do either SS40 or SKED 40 and so on. So I'm just going to select 3.5 inch OD SKED 40. Now, our current system allows you to type in a concrete depth and diameter, but we are upgrading this so that it will give you can select from drop-down menus and it'll give you a second detail sheet with your drawing of those footings, and you can add things like sonotube and rebar and dome the tops or put asphalt cover or whatever. So there's a lot of new upgrades coming there. And then the next thing you want to do is choose a line post. And usually the gauge or wall thickness of the pipe will be the same as what your terminal posts are going to be, but it's going to be a few sizes smaller. So as you can see, this one starts at 1 7 instead of 2 3, and it goes up to 2 7, which is kind of the standard sizes that you would get in a commercial or a light industrial kind of fence. We haven't added super high security options like prison fencing and those kinds of things yet, but that is on our agenda to do because that is obviously something that is done in the fence world. So I'm going to go with a 2 and 3 sked over here because we've got a 3.5 sked over there. And then again, the same thing here, line post spacing, concrete depth for the line post and line post diameter. And that is going to change when we do our next upgrade, where we're going to add all those footing options that you can just select and it'll automatically generate the detail sheet. And we are also working on drawings that actually show the spacing between posts. So we're going to have 6, 8, and 10-foot centers. So you can generate the exact drawing that you need over there. The next thing we've got on our drawing generators is concrete strength. And that is another factor in this kind of fencing. Usually concrete doesn't have to be super strong for fencing because it's not really a structural element. It's not, aside from the weight of the fence, it's not carrying the weight of building or anything like that. So usually fence concrete will be somewhere between 15 MPa or and 30 MPa. We do know that some of our users use PSI or classes and so on. So this field on our form is actually something you can type in. So you can type in exactly what strength of concrete you're using. The next thing you're going to want to specify when you're specifying a chain link fence is the top rail type. And here again, everything starts at the smaller sizes and the lower weights and so on, and it goes up to the higher options over there. On a commercial fence, it's kind of less common to see a 1 and 3 inch top rail, but we've included that there anyway because we know even though it's not common, there will always be a fence type that will have those kinds of uncommon things. So we've put that in there anyway. And then I'm just going to choose the 1 and 5 OD Sked 40 since everything else is Sked 40. The next thing you want to specify for a chain link fence is what the fittings are going to be made out of. Now, some chain link fence fittings, like tension bands and brace bands and so on, will always be made out of steel. But there's others like rail ends and dome caps and those kinds of things that could be made out of cast aluminum. Now, cast aluminum is more brittle and it's also easier to break. And you can't tack weld it if you need to. So sometimes to add to the security of a chain link fence, you would tack weld the fittings so that they're harder to remove. So if you need to build a higher security fence, it might be an idea to go with pressed steel rather than cast aluminum, just because it is stronger and you can tack weld those fittings. So the price difference between the different fittings is usually not that big. So a lot of these things are basically the same price for each unit, but you're obviously just getting a stronger option if you go with the steel rather than cast aluminum. So I'm going to go with pressed steel over there. The next thing you're going to want to specify when you're specifying a chain link fence is the chain link type. And this is also kind of a little bit more complicated. So most chain link fence, chain link mesh in North America is just a diamond pattern, same size on each side. You do get another option called Texas Weave, where there are different dimensions for the X and Y axis of your aperture, but it's very uncommon to use that kind of chain link mesh, so we haven't really put it into our drawing system yet, and nobody's actually asked for it yet. So it's a very uncommon thing. If you're specifying most chain link fences, you're going to be using a standard type of mesh. Then when you look at this list of mesh, we've got different aperture sizes, and then we've got gauges of wire. So obviously the smaller the aperture, the more secure the mesh should be because it's harder to get your fingers in there, it's harder to climb the fence, it's harder to cut the fence, all those kinds of things. And again, we've got the smallest sizes at the top and the largest sizes at the bottom. The other thing you want to pay attention to here is the gauge of the wire, and that again tells you what thickness that wire is going to be. 9 gauge on a commercial fence is the sort of lower grade, and then 6 gauge is a heavier option. but certain types of smaller mesh apertures aren't made from 6 gauge just because it's too difficult to weave them from that material. So that's why we've got most of the smaller sizes are just 9 gauge, and then the bigger sizes here we will also offer a 6 gauge option. You do also get standard chain link mesh in 11 gauge, but that's usually too thin for commercial or industrial type fences. So we don't include that on our commercial and industrial drawing generators, but it is on our residential light commercial type chain link fence generators. So again, you would just choose and whatever mesh you would want here, and that's 2-inch 9 gauge for me. And I'm not going to go with PVC coated black, I'm just going to go with galvanized. Now, the next thing you want to specify for a chain link fence is the self edge. So this is how the wires at the edges, the horizontal edges of the mesh are treated. So when the mesh is woven, there are several ways that that can be finished. So knuckled means that the wires have been bent down, so they are out of the way. So they're twisted around each other and then bent down so that there's a sort of a safe finish along the edge of the mesh. Barbed would be the same wires that are twisted together to create a barb that sticks up vertically, probably about 1 inch from the top of the mesh. And obviously that is a little bit more of a deterrent to people climbing the fence and so on. Now the most common options here for chain link fence is knuckle or knuckle barb. So you usually have either both edges knuckled, or you would have one edge knuckled and one edge barbed, and that usually goes at the top of the fence. Sometimes people will flip it around and put it at the bottom for underground security, so that does happen. And then the other option is barb. So this is not a common option, and usually if you want to use this, you would have to specially request that that mesh be manufactured that way, so it could take longer to get that kind of mesh and so on. But that would essentially give you a barbed edge or barbed finish on each chain link aperture at the top and bottom of your fence. So you can have a little bit more climbing sort of deterrent at the top and some deterrent for going under your fence too. The next thing you're going to have here is your bottom wire, and bottom wire can either be 9 gauge or 6 gauge. I'm going to go with 6 gauge, and so this would be the wire that would be along the bottom of the fence and that your mesh would be tied to at the bottom so that it doesn't sort of stretch and, misshape, become misshapen and so on. And then finally we get to tie wire spacing and hog ring spacing. So tie wires, you would actually have vertically on your line post to tie the mesh onto the post, as well as on the top rail to sort of tie the mesh onto the rail so that it hangs kind of like a curtain. So usually when you're building a chain link fence, you need to have 2 different sizes of tie wires. So you would have a longer wire for the line posts because they typically have a bigger outside diameter, or you would have a shorter wire for your top rails because they typically have a smaller diameter. And then tie wires can also be made from different materials. The most common is aluminum, but you can also get steel, and you can also get a few other options. So you can get PVC coated and so on. On our system, we just leave it that this would fall under your fitting type. So if you've gone with an aluminum fitting, then you probably use aluminum ties. It's not such a huge issue. This is something that you could probably discuss with the fence company when they're installing the fence. There's virtually no cost difference between the two, unless you're doing something really special there. And then hog rings are preformed metal rings that are used at the bottom of a fence that has bottom wire to attach the mesh onto the bottom wire. And you use a special type of pliers called hog ring pliers, and you just clip the fence on at the bottom. And this just helps so that the mesh can't be pushed open for somebody to come underneath as easily. And if you live in a place where there's snow, it will make sure that the fence stays attached to the bottom and it doesn't get stretched out by snow on the fence, and so on. So those are all the major things that you're going to need to specify if you want to specify a chain link fence. And of course, on our system, it's very simple because you just select them from drop down menus. And I've been talking for nearly 20 minutes now, but you can do this anything between 2 and 5 minutes and you can have a drawing generated. So now on our system, I'm going to draw my fence because I want to see what this is going to look like. So there you go. You can see the 4-foot high fence, and all our drawings are labeled with all the different parts and pieces that go into that fence. So you can see exactly where different elements of the fence are. Like I said, we are doing an upgrade so that you will be able to get a second sheet for your drawings that has details of the terminal and line post concrete bases. And then it writes a specification over here with all of those different specifications that we've chosen. So that would all be included there. And then at the bottom here, it'll give you a title with the 4-foot high bottom wire in concrete and so on. So this system for specifiers and architects and landscape architects and so on is designed to give you a near CAD quality drawing that you can use to send out to fence companies and say, this is what we want you to price. And because everything is hard coded into the system this way, it does make it a little bit easier to figure out what you want to include on that fence. And all of our fence and gate drawings and wood fence drawings and so on are the same way. So you can just select from the available options and it'll generate this drawing with a written specification that you can then either use. If you're doing an RFP, you can just put it straight into the RFP, or you could send it out to different fence companies to get pricing on a certain thing, or you could use it if you're doing a change order, you want someone to change something on a project or so on. So it is quite a valuable specifying tool for people outside of the fence industry as well. And again, this was just a quick run through of all the different things that you would need to select for a chain link fence if you were going to write a specification for it. I will probably be doing more videos about gates and wood fence and all kinds of other things, just because we know that if you're not in the fence industry, you probably don't speak fence and you probably don't quite understand how everything fits together. So I thought I would just run through all the different parts and pieces and how they fit together and what your options are and how you can build a specification for this type of fence. Thanks a lot for listening.